obviously you can hear and see us now, so that's kind of fruitful. We're going to get started here. It's 2:01. I expect it to kind of last maybe 30 minutes on or at a maximum on the first part of things, but I wanted to give everybody maximum time in order to kind of shop questions and pose things to the group, and we'll try and get to everything as we can. So without further ado, I'm going to flip right into the agenda. The way that we're going to run this is I'm going to do some introductions, 5 minutes of introductions of the folks here. Those of you who don't already know them, we seem to have a lot of folks that have joined us that know all of us, or at least a few of us. Then I'm going to go into about hacking history timeline using the old Duo timeline, because I think it's very succinct and very pointed. So maybe speak 10 minutes on that. And then a few minutes on motivations and hacking motivations, and we can kick that can around a little bit, and then a discussion on what we think that cybersecurity is going to look like in the future, and some do's, don'ts, gotchas, those sorts of things, and then we will take questions from everyone in their entirety. So our distinguished panel, I'll go with Ron first. Ron Gula is the president of Gula Tech Adventures. Prior to that, and prior to investing in a number of cybersecurity startups and kind of getting a number of different things off the ground, Ron was co-founder and CEO of Tenable Network Security, where he raised $300 million in VC. And growth up to 100 million in profit. So Ron is involved with defending digital campaigns and the National Security Institute, the Wilson Center, and a number of other things. Ron was also the creator of the Dragon IDS, which was the world's first commercial IDS available way back in the day. So you're dating yourself, Ron.
Thanks, Ken.
And Joe Grand, also known as Kingpin from the infamous Loft. Computer engineer, hardware hacker, product designer, teacher, daddy. Wow, a lot in here, Joe. And the proprietor.
I kept it short.
Yeah. And the proprietor of Grand Idea Studio. I've actually done some work recently in the past with Joe over at Grand Idea, and the guys, and also the guys over at Tool. Stellar group of guys. If you ever have a chance, check it out. Joe was also on a television program. I believe it was Discovery Channel. Joe.
Yep.
Prototype This. And that was a hell of a show as well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, guys. Chris Thomas, also known as Space Rogue, American cybersecurity research, white hat hacker, creator of Hacker News Network, one of the original founders of Loft, was one of the 7 guys that had testified in the Senate in '99, how they can take down the internet within 30 minutes. And I think at that point, all the politicians' mouth just went. And okay, well, let's not do that. But Chris has also been involved with various topics such as cybersecurity, electronic voting, the Internet of Things, cloud security, and balances things with kind of a real world perspective instead of the hype and the whole the sky is falling thing. So welcome aboard, Chris, and thanks for taking the time out. Then we have Dr. Richard Forno, or Rick Forno, Senior Lecturer in UMBC, Department of Computer Science, Electrical Engineering. He's also, I believe you're still doing stuff for Stanford University as well, aren't you, Rick?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great. And Rick was the first Chief Security Officer of Network Solutions. He's been consulting with Fortune 100 companies, a course instructor for CERT Coordination Center at Carnegie Mellon, a number of different things. And guys, once again, thanks so much for joining. And it's great to see your smiling faces again. And so we'll talk about some of these particular hacking attacks, and And wow, I kept that to 6 minutes. That's pretty good. Okay, so some high-profile hacks over the years and how they set the stage for today. And setting a stage, by setting a stage, I mean speaking in as far as like motivations go, because motivations do change over the years based on technologies, based on society, based on a number of different factors. The first, I guess, the first prominent recorded hack was Neville Maskelyne trying to embarrass Marconi. And a lot of folks may or may not know this, but I believe he performed what's commonly known now or retermed as a person in the middle attack, and just intercepted the communications, because back then they were thinking, all right, it's so secure, security by obscurity. If you don't know the frequency, then you can't intercept the communications. And anyone that's kind of tuned a radio dial to a radio station knows that's not the case. And so he interjected some things that at the time, one of them was actually a little limerick insulting Marconi, and this was a very public demonstration in London. So that's kind of one of the motivations there was, A, because he could do it, and B, because he kind of had an axe to grind with Marconi, because back in the day, Marconi was patenting just about everything. So it was hindering his work and his research. And incidentally, one of the side things about Maskelyne was he was a part-time magician as well. So I guess that helps you become a hacker. Going into the 80s, we've got 2600 magazine, and the Hacker's Handbook released in the 80s, and then everyone who's actually watched any quote hacker movies, War Games was the I guess the granddaddy of all the ones, even prior to Sneakers and et cetera, Firewall with Harrison Ford and that sort of thing. But War Games set the stage for the DEF CON conference, because in the movie, Matthew Broderick, if you remember the movie, he was trying to hack in just to play a game. And that's where the term, or where the term DEF CON was first, I guess, widely dispersed on a non-governmental basis, where people kind of, saw that. So, and fast forwarding to the UK's first convicted hackers, Robert Schifrin and Stephen Gold, convicted, later acquitted of cracking BT's Prestel email system. They had basically, from what I understand at the time, the Prestel email system was kind of a free dial-up, and also certain portions that you could pay for if you had a PIN, sort of like your ATM PIN. And basically, they just random generated and guessed, a proper PIN for pay subscription, and they sent an email to the Lord of Edinburgh. Consequently, got caught. Were sentenced to jail, but then a few years later, their sentence was overturned. Now, this set the stage for the Computer Misuse and Abuse Act of 1990, which is still being kicked around and still needs, in my view, to be redefined and taken care of, because it's just much too broad, much too vague. But 30 years ago, that's just the way that it was. And then we have DEF CON 1, world's largest hacker conference. Most of us have been there. Most of us have spoken there. Most of us, that's kind of where we go to, at least once, twice, thrice a year, just to get together and kind of, bounce ideas off of one another. RSA was one as well. But DEF CON, for the first time in 28 years, is actually canceled this year. So nobody's going anywhere, except maybe right here. Going down to Citibank, Vladimir Levin, they diverted about 10.7 million into other people's accounts. I think on further investigation, turned out that Vladimir Levin really didn't have a whole lot of hacking skills, but he paid a group of people about $100 for various different credentials and everything onto the X25 network, Citibank, and they weren't even breaking in from the internet. But according to Citibank, I think they recovered all but $400,000. Vladimir Levin was sentenced and ordered to pay about $200,000 in restitution. So ultimately, I don't know if they had cybersecurity insurance back then that would pick up that extra $200, but they probably wrote it off as a nice business loss. Then going down to America's most wanted hacker, our near and dear friend Kevin. I remember when Kevin was actually on probation after he got out. He incidentally he was sentenced to 5 years, and he served, I think, 8 months in solitary confinement, and the rest in custody and pretrial. The reason they had him in solitary confinement was the prosecutor had convinced the judge that Kevin could just pick up a telephone receiver and whistle some codes in and start launching ICBMs all over the place. So, looking back on it, seems kind of silly, but back then they really didn't know. And Kevin's now, I think he's a consultant for KnowBe4, which is Security Education and Awareness Program, put together with him and Stu Silverman. But he's also running Mitnick Security. So the sixth cyber war. That was basically an 8-day battle wherein we had multiple web defacements, but I don't think that it ever went beyond web defacements at that particular point. I think there were 100 U.S. sites that were defaced by the Chinese hacking team, supposedly in line with the Chinese government, and then we in turn defaced like 300, and it was kind of, in my view, back then it was kind of much ado about nothing, but it was the point that organized, coordinated defacement attacks could do damage. And we have Rafael Nunez of the World of Hell, defaced the U.S. Air Force website in 2001. I think he was in a conference in Miami in 2005 where they nabbed him, and I think he was made to pay about $5,000 in restitution. That was back in the days where we had hacking groups and most hacking groups weren't really setting the stage to kind of, mass defacements and things like that. But it was folks, especially, the DC chapters that would put together and just figure out how things worked, right? And figure out how to make something do that it wasn't naturally intended to do. And I think that's primarily why a lot of people hack, and we'll get to that. Then we have the famous TJ Maxx attack, 45 and plus million credit and debit cards stolen numbers. I think they estimated about I think close to 90% of them were expired by the time that data was pilfered, but it's anybody's guess why they kept it around that long anyway if those things were expired. It's just bad hygiene and management practices, in my view. Then we have Stuxnet. Stuxnet was actually introduced by an employee USB drive. Kim Zetter, another good friend of ours, has a wonderful book out on the whole history of Stuxnet and why it happened and how it happened. And it's a very good read. You guys should look that up on Amazon. But essentially, it hung around on the network for almost 2 years before they had discovered it. And then advertently, for the program's sake, because the program was only like 500K in size, but it melted down several centrifuges in one of Iran's nuclear power plants. And they couldn't, for the life of them, figure out why until they had someone come in and start auditing software and everything. And then they found it, and then, it was a really big to-do. But it's thought that the U.S. government and Israel had put together that, or at least most schools of thought have said that the U.S. and the government of Israel would put that together and in retaliation or just trying to subvert the nuclear program. Then we have wonderful Sesame Street's YouTube page, and streamed porn for about 22 minutes. So the motivation for that, I don't know why you want to do that for a bunch of 6 to 8 year olds, but there you have it. And then kind of brings us down to Target, where POS malware results in the theft of 40 million credit card numbers, 70 million records, and a whole host of other things. And as a follow-up to all of this, we've got Equifax, we've got a number of other different hacks, and that happen pretty much on a monthly or a bi-monthly basis. And I think next year is probably going to be getting a little bit worse. But Target, the POS malware, That was a result of a backdoor being opened by, I believe, a refrigeration contractor that they had. So it's a good segue into looking very, very closely at the people that are connected to your network and you're doing business with and your third parties. Make sure you're doing your due diligence there. So what do all of these have in common? Just a few. So the graph on the left-hand side was taken from the 2020 Verizon data breach report. And in it, it stated that about like 56% of all breaches that at least were reported were organized crime related. And then we have, nation state, other, system admin, end user, and then unaffiliated, which is just something that they can't get attribution on. And anybody, Chris, you know from running a SOC and everything, attribution is sometimes very difficult to come by. Because you just can't just sit and point the finger. I think it's you. You better have some proof or you'd probably be sued out of existence. So we just go with unaffiliated or unattributed. Now, as for some of the motivations, I talked about one of these, hacking for fun, right? Because we can. There's a whole TV show that's dedicated to what they call life hacks, and essentially that is hacking because you're using something in a purpose that it wasn't intended for, either for to benefit some other purpose or to just do something that it wasn't intended to do. Example, a nice long flat blade screwdriver. You've got that stubborn oil filter on, and you're changing your oil. You use a hammer and you whale that thing through the oil filter, and you've got enough leverage to finally crank that thing off. There you are. There you go, master hacker, uber hacker, right? So that's one example. Then we have espionage, both corporate and governmental. If you don't think that folks want to get hold of other corporate secrets, especially today, and so I know Josh is, God bless him, he's going to have his hands full over at CISA with the COVID-19 stuff. So there are going to be a ton of folks that are trying to get hold of things like that. But there's also governmental espionage as well. Back in 2012, this incident comes to mind, the VOHO incident. And it hit approximately 300 businesses in the greater Boston area and about another 300 in the DC. The DC area, they were targeting defense contractors and the like. They were targeting financial services industry up in the Boston area. My company was one of them that got hit by the backscatter, which they launched 4 0 days onto the network. With, I think, a probability of success at about 30% each. So we had 8 systems out of about 3 to 5,000 systems that were actually affected. We spent 2 weeks in full, shutdown mode, trying to do a return to normal operations to prove that we didn't have any data exfil. Very stressful time. So, but the attribution on that went back to the Chinese government, and RSA did a full synopsis on it and a full report on everything. Then we have profit, aka the organized crime, or in some cases unorganized crime. We've got incidents for phishing, crypto malware, ransomware, things of that note, that just go and encrypt every file and say, hey, send Bitcoin to this. So you've got that motivation. And then you have cyber terrorism, like the what you would consider the Stuxnet worm, disruption of critical infrastructure. I was convinced when I sat in the dark in 2003 in New York City when the whole East Coast went black. I was convinced somebody was up to something. And luckily, I was wrong. But this was back in the days, only 7 or 8 years after 9/11. You kind of have to expect some of those things, and you have to do your best to prepare for them. So then we have something that near and dear to a lot of our journalists' hearts these days is hacktivism, and that's hacking for a cause. It's where a company either doesn't share your point of view on a particular personal message or a personal level, and so you kind of go for retribution, or you try and make them look bad, or you impersonate them, or something like that. There are many different ways that you can enact someone can enact some type of hacktivism. And then we have insider threat, or disgruntled employees or ex-employees. This one, I think, is probably more to be feared this year than anyone else. When you take away someone's livelihood, and we have record unemployment, but you pull somebody's livelihood away from them, and they're liable to start thinking in desperate measures as to, how can they get back on their feet, be it, moral, immoral, good, bad, ugly. Putting food in your kid's mouth is kind of a priority for most people, right? So just keep an eye out for something like that. Now, I'd like to just move this back, and we'll kind of get into some discussion here. I have a few questions that have either been submitted by folks via email or that we've kind of contributed. But I'd like to ask everyone individually just a few questions here, and I guess we'll start with you, Rick. I think you're on mute.
Yes.
Okay, so compared to years and years ago, and we're kind of all silverbacks here. We've been doing this for what seems like way too long sometimes, right? But compared to years ago, do you think the easier flow of communication that we've got today, does it favor the attacker or does it favor the defender? And why do you think so?
At the risk of sounding like a professor, it depends. I really think it does depend, because it can favor both. The attackers always have the advantage because they're not bound by rules and constraints and norms and standards of conduct the way the defenders or the good guys are. So having instant communication, on-demand technologies, anytime, anywhere around the world does give the attacker an advantage. But at the same time, the defenders also have these technologies, some of which are much more commercially polished platforms and tools, and various channels that they can also be nimble and agile and adaptable as well. So really, I don't think it changes the dynamic of the attacker versus defender that much. It just elevates the game to this next decade. There's always been this sine wave type of dynamic. Every attacker has an equal and opposite defense type of thing. I think we're still in that realm, but the speed of information and the technologies certainly elevates the game for everybody, and they become faster and more informed as over time because of these technology developments.
Oh, very cool. What do you think, Ron? Same question, all of you guys.
I think that you should make us so people can see us and not your awesome cup of coffee here. I agree with Rick. He doesn't really sound like a professor.
Okay, sorry, yeah.
No, it's all good. Thank Liger for this suggestion there. I don't think Rick sounds like a professor at all. I think the problem is just like cybersecurity in general. It's so complicated that we need simpler ways to kind of describe it, and in a way that kind of makes it more appealing for people to come in. There's more stuff to defend now than ever before, but there's also more information and ways to defend it. And we have no good way of saying when we're done. It's always a risk conversation or anything like that. Now, having said that, we seem to know how to secure nuclear weapons, how to secure casinos, how to secure a lot of interesting stuff like that. But we don't apparently pay enough attention to securing things that matter. Like, as a society, what should be the penalty for losing freaking control over DMs on Twitter? Do we need to tar and feather the CEO? Should they have been PCI compliant? Both of those things are irrelevant things from a societal point of view.
That's very true. And that's actually just a recent there with the whole send me 1,000 Bitcoin, I'll send you 2.
You got to update your history thing now, right?
Absolutely. What are your thoughts, Joe?
Actually, Rick had said pretty much everything that I had written down. But one thing I will say is, like, going through the history of hacking, most of the hacks are not technically complicated, right? So it's like, as the flow of communication gets better and there's more resources and ways for people to communicate, a lot of that, to me, seems like it doesn't even matter for so many of these attacks that are against sort of human error or phishing or things. There are technically complicated attacks that we know of and that people are working on, especially on the hardware side that we can talk about later. But in general, that's a small percentage of everything else. So I just feel like, there's so much to focus on in just general terms of security hygiene than even worrying about how people can communicate still. It's like there's a lot to do.
And your thoughts, Chris?
Automation works both ways, right? It's fairly an agnostic type of technology system. The good guys use it, bad guys use it. The easier it is, the easier the information flows, and it flows in both directions. Good guys are able to get that vulnerability information quicker, but so are the bad guys, and they're able to develop exploits for it based on that speed of communication. So the communication is going to get faster as we go into the future, hopefully, and it's going to benefit both sides.
Do you think what we've always termed responsible disclosure has any impact on any of that?
Yeah, responsible disclosure is the big, 5,000-pound elephant in the room, and has been for the last 20 years. It hasn't changed and hasn't gone away, and we still haven't come up with an answer as to what exactly responsible is or isn't. And it's a long-standing debate, and we're not going to solve it on this call.
Actually, a related question to that one of you guys might know is, Space Roga just said, as soon as something gets disclosed or information gets out there about a bug or an exploit, the defenders have a chance to fix things. But like Rick said, it's hard because they have all these constraints, and the attackers can look at it as well and then weaponize that. What are you guys seeing from a response versus, are the good guys responding fast enough with the disclosure, or are bad guys able to weaponize it before things get fixed? And this is a legitimate question because I'm a hardware guy, so I'm really curious about that.
I think if you look at Zoom, Zoom did a good job. Not only did they fix the vulnerabilities that, folks like Tenable found, and, Zoom bombing and stuff like that, but they did a good job communicating to the public, what they were, my mom and dad knew about the Zoom fixes and stuff like that. Now you compare that to the more recent, F5 breach, this is the external thing on the perimeter of your most important, financial applications. It's got a major 0 day that, is kind of a typo. Or if you compare to go back to Cloudflare's, oops, we had an outage kind of thing. The general public doesn't know about that, but those companies did a really good job, including people like NSA, Cyber Command, issuing information about that. How was the response? That's on an individual basis. It's kind of like wearing masks.
I think that's a good point, Ron, because it shows that communication is important, and failure to communicate tends to be a detriment to both sides. Right? The more you communicate, the more information you provide, the better off you are, regardless of your position and where you stand on things.
Especially
go ahead.
Especially with disclosure, we can't overlook, the lone actor disclosing on their own. They don't care. They don't report to anybody. And things like the so-called Streisand effect, when a company wants to squash any discussion or public disclosure of a vulnerability that in their product, and they essentially launch a DMCA takedown campaign against security researchers to muzzle them, thinking this is going to keep the vulnerability quiet. And all it does is draw more public attention to it, so that folks from Ron's parents to my grandparents will hear about this and draw more attention to the vulnerability, and thus raise the exposure level for potential targets.
So we've had about 15 years since the Mike Lynn fiasco at Black Hat, where Cisco kind of shut him down. Do you guys think it has gotten any better or worse?
It depends. We still have incidents. We still have incidents where that sort of thing happens today, right? I mean, it's been 15 years, but we still have companies attempting to force researchers to muzzle them and not disclose, even at last minute before they get on stage. And on the other side of that, though, we have other companies who are way more open than they ever were, and are way more welcoming to researchers and their efforts. So it depends.
Yeah, I just saw a company about a week or two ago invoke DMCA against a researcher. I forget what the vulnerability was, but really it just was a 2x4 to the face when I saw that, thinking, here we are 15 years later, still dealing with this exact issue. And by the way, Ken, to your point about the Mike Lynn thing, I have my DMCA takedown hanging on the wall of my office over here as a badge of honor from that DEF CON that year, from that Black Hat.
You're going to have companies like Apple. They just released a security developers kit or something like that, which is great. They're encouraging tinkering and hacking on their stuff. But at the same time, you can't really tell a well-engineered, well-secured cloud company versus one that just kind of throws up a nice slick website and focuses on user experience and sacrifices crypto on the back end, stores your data, Lord knows where, you know, and those are the kind of companies I'm worried about that are going to invoke DCMA and try to keep people shut when they actually do find really interesting that impacts their stuff at a society level.
I think another thing too is, you know, we're talking mostly about kind of software companies and network companies, and Spacer and I have talked about this a lot on various other panels, but from the hardware side, we're more like 20 years behind where the software companies are now. You know, it's like we have Apple releasing their security things and starting to embrace people finding vulnerabilities in their systems. But hardware is a little bit different because they're not really part of this cybersecurity community at all, right? Or it's almost a different world. And engineers there are trained to build products and get them working and get them out the door and not really worrying about security. That's shifting a little bit, but the companies just don't understand when somebody comes to them and says, hey, I found a vulnerability that can do X, Y, Z, or I can use your product to take over a network or whatever. It's a different world. It's like two separate worlds. So their responses a lot of times maybe aren't the Barbra Streisand effect, and they're not necessarily legal, but they're pretty much like ignoring the problems. And that's a problem on its own. And it's just this lack of understanding. So yeah, we're way behind on that side.
I think that's why we're seeing a big push towards the convergence of computing and hardware in things like cyber physical systems, where you have this convergence of the CS traditional mindset to what Joe's talking about, and the hardware aspect that is just as important, and if not more so, because it's also being controlled by computing technologies that can be exploited remotely, even if the device is local. So I think that's a good thing, but you're right, we're still well behind the curve in addressing that.
Well, speaking of, and kind of moving on to the next question, what are some of the ways that hackers, in your view, have adapted to new technology and overcoming new controls and things of that nature? I guess, is there any particular technique that that comes to mind when people are trying to flesh out a new ODA to kind of weaponize and sell or anything like that? Let's start with you, Rick.
I wish you wouldn't.
You feel free to pass the baton.
It's kind of constantly a cat and mouse game, right? I mean, the bad guys are always looking to break into the new shiny stuff, and the good guys are always building the new shiny stuff, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. I mean, a few years ago, there was a kind of basically a new technology that came out called fuzzing, which basically threw a bunch of stuff at things until it broke. And then we'd look at what broke and figured out if we could exploit it. So there are new techniques that come out all the time, but there's also new defensive techniques that come out all the time. We've had two-factor authentication around for decades, but it's finally in the last 5 years or so starting to become fairly standard. Whether it's actually a physical hardware token or an SMS thing or some other factor, we're actually starting to use that technology now. So it's a constant cat and mouse game. The bad guys figure out how to break something. We try to figure out how to defend it even better.
I think within that, though, even though the technologies are changing, a lot of the process hasn't in decades, as far as like gathering information on what the new widget is, how does it work, finding specifications, finding documentation, reading through that, looking for errors in implementation, whether it's, a technical thing or a human thing. And I feel like that's where, no matter what the technology is, it's that same sort of thing. And I always like to say we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? It's like some of hacking is not new. And any new technique is going to be based on stuff that other hackers had done earlier. So it's just this cat and mouse continuing snowball sort of thing.
One thing, I mean, to Joe's point, I think that's a really good point. If you think of security more generally, there were really three components. The hardware, the actual stuff, the physical stuff, then the software, the stuff, the information and the programs and the apps on the hardware, the physical devices. And then you got the wetware component that has remained constant for 50 years, if not millennia, meaning, the individual user and the person who develops the app, develops the technology, deploys it, sells it, markets it, attacks it, defends it, uses it, abuses it. I mean, it all comes back to, the human factors in computing at all levels, from one end to the other. So the technology itself, the hardware and software, is constantly evolving, and the good guys and bad guys are using it. But what is not evolving, unfortunately, at least in my view, is the wetware. These humans seem to be pretty complacent when it comes to a lot of basic cybersecurity 101 practices, which leads to the events and incidents that Ken described earlier.
Yeah, what I've seen a lot too in the hardware side is there's, a lot of great academic papers and white papers that show encryption is good and protecting your data in transit. All of these common things that on the network side are used, but it's much easier said than done, right? So like if you're actually implementing encryption or whatever the newest technology is that we don't know, quantum mechanic, whatever, when you're implementing it on a system that you might not understand what the purpose is, what the goal is, why am I protecting, what do I need to protect against, who might be attacking me, things go wrong. And we see it all the time in hardware. We see, private keys stored in, clear text and firmware updates. We see hard-coded credentials all the time. And it's mostly, I'm not going to blame it on the engineers, but I think it's just this lack of understanding of why are they implementing security, or are they doing it at the last minute because they have to check that box off before they ship it.
And a lot of the cases, come down to, the business having override into what the technology say is, because, there is a potential, or there is, a view that it could break a business process. So it's like, no, don't do that.
Yeah, there've been some really good changes back there. I mean, when Microsoft started doing Windows Update, centralizing patching, that was probably one of the single most things they could have done to harden the system. But you look at these new kind of technologies like containerization, microservices. On one hand, you're like, well, we're kind of removing the operating system from the equation, just focusing on code. On the other hand, look at my 1,000 developers that can make code commits and get phished and do anything, pretty much at any day of the week to do that. So it's really interesting trying to identify progress there.
We have one question from the audience here, and I'll read it verbatim, but you guys can probably see it as well. Attackers continue to innovate, use new tricks and techniques to even bypass breach detection systems in order to infiltrate organizations, steal valuable data, and cause damage. Is there anything we can do to not only detect but also stop these evasions from happening? And I guess my interpretation is there anything that we can do that we're not already doing that would assist in stopping this stuff? What are you guys' thoughts?
Well, I mean, I can riff on that for a little bit. So, so valuable data, what does that mean, right? Is it all the entries in my Oracle database? Is it my email? Is it the PDF on my desktop? Is it the covert communications I'm doing with my mistress? It's valuable that we have a problem identifying data, right? So I like the idea of identifying what is important and then answering those questions. Who's got access to this? Who doesn't have access to this? Banks do this all the time. Large enterprises do this all the time. The DoD does this all the time. As you get out of those circles, though, my dentist doesn't do it. He might think I'm HIPAA compliant and I'm good. So you lose this concept of what's important when you get further out from those who can, make an investment there. No one product's going to stop all that. No one policy is going to stop all that.
Well, I think the question, if I can try to break it down even to its basic level, is can you stop hacks, right? Can you stop people from breaking in? I'm going to go right out on a ledge and say no, you can't. And I think that should not be your goal. In most cases, if you try to make something impenetrable, it's going to fail. Somebody's going to find a hole and they're going to get in. What you should be trying to do is detect the breach and limit the access that someone has once they get in. So that when the breach occurs, you're notified of it immediately and can limit what they have access to and how much data they can get. That should be the goal, not trying to make something, impenetrable, hack-proof, let's stop all the bad guys from getting in, because anything can be hacked, as we always like to say. Enough time and motivation, someone's going to get in. So what your goal should be is, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's just like any other disastrous situation. Really, you're not going to prevent it from happening because much like a hurricane, you're not going to stop it from coming. But you've got to be prepared, should that happen. And most people take this into a business impact analysis and their BCP plans, and they're very, very good at it. But I have not seen from at least the incident response side at most companies that level of seriousness or that level of integration into those plans. have a couple of questions for Ron here, and actually I have a couple of questions for all of you guys. And I'm just checking very quickly to make sure that we don't have any in-person questions here. I think we're caught up on. Oh, well, we do have a question. It just came in. My son is going to be 10, and while he's always interested in knowing about white hat security and being the good guy, is there a certification that kids 10 to 12 years old can invest time in?
I don't know if there's a certification, but there's definitely some things and projects that he can do. There's a couple of introductory capture the flag competitions that he can participate in. One's called PICO CTF, PICO. Another one has some hack in the box CTF, which I believe has some introductory stuff. And on top of that, he can organize, I don't know if it goes down to 10 years old, but look into something called Cyber Patriot, which is put on by the US Air Force, which is geared towards middle and high schoolers, which allows them to put a team together and compete in cyber competitions. So if he's showing an interest in that area, those are some things that hopefully that you can, oh, and I believe later this month, SANS, S-A-N-S, has a free 2-day cyber camp for middle and high schoolers that you can look into as well.
There's also
Yeah,
a summer camp
go ahead.
sponsored by NSA called Gen Cyber that I'm not sure if it goes down to 10 years old, but I think maybe 12, that is designed to get kids interested and motivated into going into security career fields. And that's offered around the colleges around the country during the summertime when we reopen.
Yeah, two comments. Related to the NSA, the National Cryptological Museum did a whole series. I was very honored to be able to talk. How do you actually teach cyber to classrooms at that level? And a lot of really good content up there. The other thing I was going to suggest is Cybrary. I'm an investor in it, but this is free. Anybody, including kids, can go and get certification classes, introduction videos on everything. Wi-Fi hacking, Wi-Fi security, firewall basics, CISPA, PCI, how do I secure, home routers, that kind of stuff. It's all there.
Great.
I do actually want to mention one other thing too. I haven't actually taken this, but it's in my list of tabs. Hackaday has an introduction to reverse engineering with Ghidra, which is a very nice open source tool, thanks to the NSA, to help reverse engineer software and firmware. But it's something if they're curious about getting into the deep details of looking at software and figuring out how it works and seeing has somebody tried to manipulate that and create malware. This class, I've heard great things about it, and it goes through all the steps of using the tool with some demos and things. And besides, I definitely wouldn't focus on certifications, right? It's like at that age, you really just want to foster that curiosity and learn whatever they're interested in, and learn what they can. Like when we were younger, when Spacer and I were in the loft, what we would do is set up our own environments and hack on those, which may or may not be possible now. I'm not really sure. Maybe set up a virtual machine, you can hack on stuff there. But a lot of it was self-taught and reading and learning and exploring and making mistakes and fixing those. And that's really that process that you want to instill is, to me, that hacker mindset. Yes. All the certifications and the formal stuff can come later with the schooling and things, but all these CTFs and everything are a great way to kind of hit all these different segments.
You are so right, Joe. Developing that hacker mindset at a young age. I mean, all of us who are on this call and who have been in the industry for 20, 30 years or longer, we were self-taught. There was no cybersecurity undergraduate program in college when we were in school. There was no PICO CTF in high school. I mean, we had to learn this on our own. For coming at it from whatever angle, and we learn by doing and by trial and error in a lab, or legally or illegally, however we did it. And that is so important because you can't just throw a switch and get 5 certifications and presto, you are now going to be an awesome cybersecurity person making 6 figures. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
You can't just wave a magic wand and create a hacker. It's more of a mindset than just technical skills.
Well, we've got a question come in from the audience, and actually, thank you, Eleanor. We appreciate this. But her question is, understanding motivation can help defense. How exactly? And does attribution help, or is it a distraction? And I'll kind of take, I guess, a first swag at that. Eleanor, my view is that understanding, various different mindsets for why you want to do something, if you could take away that motivation or make that motivation a little bit more difficult, then then obviously it's a payoff versus should I get caught type thing for one thing. But from another aspect, a lot of folks are not IT based or IT savvy, and we have a few on this call that are just business people, and they're wanting to kind of understand a little bit more about the stuff that they don't necessarily have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, because it's very important. But asking those questions, and I'll turn this over to the rest of the crew here.
I think attribution is important, certainly at the nation state level, to do the best you can, because attribution directly informs policy and policy related decisions, whether it's a military response or an economic response or something like that. We can't go off, shooting willy-nilly at the first country we think an attack originated from, because it could be the fourth hop in a 12-hop chain. So attribution in some ways is very important. Do I as an individual need to know or care that country X is targeting my home router? I might have a curious interest in it, being a security person, but I'm not going to lose sleep over it necessarily. So it really depends on who you are and what your kind of meta mission is. Government definitely needs to work towards attribution. Companies, I think it's useful to know, and a lot of them will work with government to develop attribution signatures, but I don't think attribution needs to be drilled down to every user and every company on the internet. But government absolutely needs to focus on attribution.
Any other thoughts, guys?
I think Eleanor really said it well, though. At the commercial level, at the lower level, attribution is a distraction. I mean, yes, you want to know, did an insider walk out with your data? Did somebody hack it? Was a remote, but dwelling on if it was the Russians or the Chinese that stole, that wired money out, it's irrelevant. Like, you've lost the money, and people try to play this attribution game. And if they're up against a nation state, they got way more resources than your bank does.
Okay, I will. Oh, we have a question from Glenn. And Glenn asks, if you had to prioritize all the things you could do to improve your cybersecurity defense, pick only 3, what would those be?
So I'd love to jump at that. And something that Chris said earlier on, that you can't, all systems are hackable. And that's a true statement. But if you were going to sit there and design the optimal system, like, that's the first thing you should always think about. Like, what are you trying to do? And did you build it correctly in the first place? Because everything else is just an exercise in compliance and checkbox and stuff like that. Now, there's some great work out there, like the NIST cybersecurity framework and the MITRE attack framework, the SANS critical controls, which are now at the Center for Internet Security. And these are really, really good things where you can go and say, well, if I add this and add this, I'm going to add value. But it's not the same thing as designing a secure bank interaction from the ground up to the beginning. Like, if you're waiting to the end and deciding if you should do 2-factor authentication or patch more quicker, you're kind of failed. And we can argue about which one's better, but you should always try to remember, what is the goal that you're trying to solve.
Yeah. And this is the thing. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to quickly say, I would also say education. So maybe not it's not a technical thing to prioritize, but to be able to educate everybody in the company, even just about basic security, right? And that's something that we talked about, the human error. And it's just something that even if a person is not directly involved in any of the IT side of things, the network side, it's just understanding what attackers could do against them or against the systems, and just be aware of what is going on, right? So the basic concepts of phishing and your don't click on the links, and just understand what somebody might try to do against you as the larger picture, right? So just education of everybody, I think, is important.
I mean, to be funny, my first option will be first get rid of all the users, but we can't do that. But
if you can't do that, you just have to educate them.
Yeah, education, and that's a great point. I mean, educating users, we've been talking about training and awareness for decades, but I would say maintain situational awareness as a company and let that trickle down to your employees. For example, don't focus exclusively on cybersecurity threats, hackers and white hat, black hats and whatnot. Look at the world picture. If there's a political crisis happening in Eastern Europe and there's a cyber war between Russia and Ukraine taking place, and I'm the CSO for a bank in the United States, even if we're not doing any business in that part of the world, I want to be aware this is happening because we may get dragged into this conflict by hacktivists or others just looking to cause mischief as a result of this world event. So take cybersecurity situational awareness very broadly to include current events around the world, not just in your town, and then back up the situational awareness, with a way to distill it into informing your sensors and defenses in a way so that you're not guarding against everything, but your ears are more perked up to things that may or may not manifest itself. That I think is crucial to again maintain situational awareness, and to Ron's point, understanding the context of what you're defending and what the risks are. So in the context of a cyber war in Eastern Europe, let's say, yes, I'm a bank, I might be dragged into this here, so I'm going to monitor certain things, but understand that we're part of a global banking system. And we may get dragged into things where we have to share information about what we're seeing on our networks with other partners and competitors. So context is key when you're looking at situational awareness with regards to cybersecurity. So those are my two recommendations: situational awareness and understanding the context.
Right. So Joe, one question, Joe, was what was the craziest thing you ever hacked on Prototype This?
Oh man,
I'm interested to hear this one.
Yeah, so Prototype This was basically 4 engineers building crazy projects of things, and our goal was to show the educational kind of engineering process of the real world stuff. Like, we weren't faking things on TV, which is what we were very proud of. And actually, we released, at least I released, all of the electronics documentation and stuff on my website to prove that we weren't faking it. So the craziest thing, I would say, each of the builds was unique. We had 2 weeks to do it, so we always had to hack stuff together, whether it was like, crazy 30-foot tall water slide with hydraulic control that we had to somehow computer control that to do what we wanted to do, or giant boxing robots that had motion control and using technologies in a way as they weren't really intended to get the job done, right? Which is what hacking is to me. One of my favorites, though, is we had one build, which was the traffic busting truck, which was this autonomous, it was a truck that was outfitted with special mecanum wheels, which were these omnidirectional wheels that could come down out of the truck, lift itself up, drive over other traffic, and then autonomously park itself, to do parallel parking. Since the truck could move in any direction, it could just go forward and then just slide into the spot, which was pretty cool. So the coolest part about that is we used these mecanum wheels that were from developed for the US Navy for like weapons carrier forklifts on aircraft carriers. So a very specific niche development. We got to use these wheels, and I hacked a wireless PlayStation 2 controller with some custom circuitry to control the wheels. And we made this thing called the self-driving couch, we had another name for it too. I can't remember what it was. But we would sit on the couch and drive it around to test the wheels before we put them on the truck. And that was just a cool mix of, gaming technology and more complicated robotic, technology, if you will, with these wheels. And the people from the company who had come over to kind of help us deal with all the wiring and everything were like, we've been trying to do a wireless control system for, however many months, and you did it in 3 days. But of course, we hacked it together and didn't have to worry about what would happen if it failed. Really, we would just unplug it. But it was that was a cool hack. So there's a lot of that, really just thinking about how do you take different pieces and cram them together to get things to work. And that was one of the coolest. But definitely watch the show. It's on all streaming platforms now. It was away for a little while, but it's all back. You can watch low resolution versions on YouTube. You can get DVDs on eBay, but it's all on all the streaming platforms now too.
So we got two questions left here, and that's probably all the time that we're going to have. One of them, how do artificial intelligence how does artificial intelligence facilitate us in improving cybersecurity? Anybody want to swag at that one?
Yeah, I'll take a stab. So, so the short answer is it's going to get us halfway there, but it's not going to get us all the way there. So one of the ways it gets us there is most AI solutions involve looking at lots and lots of data. So I am all for any type of cyber solution where I have an honest, trusted broker, maybe a managed security company, maybe a vendor, where they can gather and see into other people that look like me and then have this feedback loop. And it's very, very useful, because one of the big problems we have is, how do I compare to like my peers? You know, am I the last bank to patch the F5 router or not? Now, is that really AI? No, but all AI is based on data. If you're going to collect that much data, that's like one of the most useful things you can do with it. Now, as far as is an AI then going to like, hey, Chris, for you, I'm going to recommend this one thing. For Joe, I'm going to recommend something else because some giant AI algorithm. Absolutely not, because every network is completely different. There's no common schema to do those things. And I routinely get pitches from AI-backed companies that do security operations center enablement, vulnerability prioritization, you name it, anomaly detection on the network. None of them are that good. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. Oh, except for computer vision. Like, computer vision is really good for a lot of things. You know, where you can rapidly look at lots of stuff. That's kind of an AI thing, but not in the spirit of this question. So that's my rant on AI.
I think AI presents a greater concern for cybersecurity on the adversarial side. When you look at things like deep fakes, and you look at biometrics and, you know, voice authentication or photo or videos, if you know, the integrity of information is paramount. And not to get too wonky, but, you know, you've got the confidentiality, integrity, and availability as sort of our three bedrocks of cybersecurity. You know, we've always focused on the confidentiality, keeping the secrets, and we've outsourced the availability, the network access, and things like that. We've never really looked at the integrity with the same amount of interest. And now, with computers permeating our world and defining practically everything, the use of AI and machine learning to develop videos and audios that can be used by adversaries to trick systems and trick users, I think is a huge concern, and one that we're only in the first inning on in terms of how we deal with it.
And response to someone in the audience here. Yes, we are recording this, and when we have the link available, we'll make it available for everyone that's participating, as well as, you know, anyone that wants to view this. I think we've got time for one more question. Thank you, Eleanor, for keeping us busy. She'd like to know, what impact is COVID and its work from home transformation? What is the impact having on corporate security policies and practices? The prediction of long-term effects, and how are board level and cyber risk conversations planning and changing, if at all?
Jump on that for a quick second, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So in my day job, I work for a group called X-Force Red of IBM Security, and we do testing of corporate networks, products, whatever. We have seen a dramatic rise in demand for testing of not only endpoints, but of network infrastructure at the corporate level, because all their employees are no longer inside their perimeter and on their network.
Yep.
They're all working from home. And so there's definitely a risk factor there that a lot of companies are realizing is an issue, and they are trying to test for it and trying to solve those problems. So it's definitely having an impact. The virus is definitely having an impact on those security discussions, at least in some companies. And they're trying to hopefully make things a little bit safer.
Anyone for I kind of I guess give my little take on it, but I think work from home transformation. Fortunately enough, there are folks that didn't believe that you could work efficiently at home prior to this. And so I think, you know, the landscape, you'll probably see it changing a lot of the corporate security policies and as to what is allowable, what's not allowable. But I think that you're also probably going to see after this an additional investment in technology that allows those folks, you know, to do that rough working from wherever they may be. Just my take on it.
With telework, telemedicine early in COVID. when the FDA or Health and Human Services very quickly waived the requirement for formal HIPAA reviews for telemedicine providers, so that your doctor could get on FaceTime and do a FaceTime with a patient who was concerned about COVID without having FaceTime approved under HIPAA. That was very surprising to see very quickly, and soon after, insurance companies and doctors and hospitals were using Skype and Teams and whatever else to do telemedicine. So that shows you that the paradigm, I think, is shifting, and we'll see more structural shifting, I think, as well going forward.
I think the whole work from home with COVID is accelerating a lot of the trends. So we all hear about zero trust networking and, you know, strong authentication of our users and stuff. And how this is kind of being impacted is, you know, organizations are discussing everything from, you know, do I have to have a corporate access resource laptop, you know, to get into the network? Is it an authenticated, you know, network? Is it the browser that's on that thing? And people are designing these architectures to do their business remotely without, you know, having control over 100% of their network. And this is good. This is a good approach.
Yeah, I think the early rush to adoption by a lot of companies with you know, the MDM platforms and things like that have really kind of facilitated that. So yeah, I mean, we've had these types of things, and like we were kind of mulling over before, you know, umpteen different ways to do video communications and stuff. So it's been interesting, and I think we're kind of out of time here, guys. But I wanted to say, you know, once again, thanks so much, and it's been really enjoyable spending this time with you guys.
It's been an honor. Thanks for setting this up, Ken.
Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks again. Thanks for everybody for watching and asking questions also.
Very active group. That's great. Okay, guys, with that, I'm going to stop the recording here, and there we go. We'll stop the recording. Did it stop? I thought it stopped.
Somebody's always recording.
Yeah. All right. Let me exit this full screen, and we'll do it that way. But thanks for everyone for joining, and